So in this video, I'm going to show you how to name binary ionic compounds. I will also talk about how to come up with empirical formula when giving a cation and an anion. Before we start, we should know what some of the terms mean. An ionic compound is when a metal is bonded to a nonmetal and its structure depends on the sizes of the cations and anions. A binary compound is a chemical compound that contains two different elements. A cation is a positively charged ion and an anion is a negatively charged ion. The formula of a compound is when all of the charge of a cation is equal to all of the charge of the anion. So we have to figure out how many cations we would need and how many anions we would need in order to have an overall neutral compound. So here we have this problem. We would have to figure out the empirical formula as well as naming the compound. We have some cations and some anions. So writing the empirical formula, there's a little trick that we could use. It is the charge of the cation is the quantity of the anions you need and vice versa. So for the first one, it's Ca2 plus and P3 minus. So what you would do is lasso and bring it over, and the same with this and bring it over. So you would get Ca3 and P2. Sometimes there are instances where this trick will not be quite as useful. So you would get Ca2 plus, S2 minus, or Ca2 plus and O2 minus. When you get these types of cation and anions, you would end up with Ca2O2. So you'll have to remember that the empirical formula is one where you have simplified the ratio of all the atoms down to the smallest ratio possible. So the simplified form of Ca2 plus S2 minus would be Cas, and the simplified form of Ca2 plus O2 minus would be CaO. And you would get Ca3 and 2 for the last one. Next, we're going to name these compounds. We will need the periodic table to do so. When naming a compound, we first name the cation, then followed by the anion. For the first part, naming the cation will be the same as naming an atom. This means that calcium as a cation and calcium as an atom has to have the exact name. So calcium is right here, so it would just be calcium as a cation, and also on the periodic table it's also calcium. We need the periodic table to reference because if any of the cations are transition metals, which is this part right here, we would have to indicate the charge of that cation being named. So here we have manganese and chlorine. Manganese is a transition metal, so the transition metals are right here, this whole block. They're transition metals. Since it is a transition metal, we would have to write manganese out and the charge 2. It would be in Roman numerals, in parentheses, no space, and then space chloride. You would drop the ending of chlorine and add IDE to make it chloride. Okay. So here we will finish up the table. This becomes calcium phosphide. This becomes calcium sulfide. This becomes calcium oxide, and this becomes calcium nitride. And that's how you name binary ionic compounds.